And this morning, what we are focusing in on is kind of thinking about how the relationship between growth in our businesses and growth in our teams, and how that links to our development and the development of our teams. And it's something that I've experienced multiple times throughout my career, where those times where I've really focused in on mine and my team's professional development, thinking about their improvement, my improvement, strengthening leadership capability, helping my teams to focus and prioritize development, and then the direct correlation between that and their performance and results. And it's one of those things, it's really interesting, and this is where I'll perhaps share a couple of slides with you. I don't want to go full kind of tilt PowerPoint, but there are some really interesting things that might be worth sharing. So let me just do that. And in particular, so this morning, give you a bit of time to think this morning. I do want to throw a few seeds, but we run this scorecard in our business where we just kind of ask various different assessment statements. And I ask two questions. One of the questions is about prioritizing professional development. And we present people with this statement. So the statement is, I haven't been prioritizing my own professional development. Something always gets in the way. And it's really fascinating. So when we present that statement, you can see 65% of people either strongly agree or agree. Okay. But then 16% of people neither agree nor disagree. So if they don't think strongly enough to agree, then they really would take that as disagreement. So, or as agreement, I should say. So we end up at actually closer to 81%. So 8 out of 10 people kind of saying, actually, something's always getting in the way of my development. And that's my experience as well in a business, that people will do what's required in terms of development, but they don't necessarily proactively prioritize their own development. And yet it's such a big enabler for performance and improvement. So I'll kind of share that with you. The other thing that's been useful, the other statement we present to people is, I have a vision for myself in future as a world-class sales or business professional. And that's intentional, because if ever you've managed teams where you have this conversation about performance and improvement, sometimes you'll meet not resistance, but you might meet a bit of apathy, where people say, I'm pretty good at what I do. I'm hitting my numbers. I'm doing what I need to do. And years ago, when I first started leading teams, I kind of learned this principle from a manager I had, actually, where the question that I asked in those situations wasn't, well, what could you work on? It's, well, can I ask you then, if you had a vision for yourself as being world class at what you do, where would you say you are right now versus being world class? And that's a really useful question, because it starts to shift people's expectations around where they are and where they could be. So I share that with you because I've found it personally useful in my career. So that's the scorecard results. I'm not going to do the current approach to personal development. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that might be useful. Then I'm going to invite you to go and have a conversation with your peers, because that's where a lot of the value is in these sessions. But this kind of model that we use in our business for coaching, so this is how do you develop a coaching leadership style. We've got these 5 steps. Okay, so the first one is contracting, having a strategic conversation about standards and agreeing performance principles, agreeing how you're going to work together with your teams, talking about that coaching relationship that you have as a manager and a leader. That's really important. Setting really clear objectives and goals, so agreeing with your teams what high performance looks like. What are the key activities that deliver at the next level, so that they agree to them, and then you and they can manage them together. Action and observation, creating some space for you to actually watch them doing what they do. And that sounds obvious, but it's, again, from a leadership perspective, it's an area where we very often miss. We don't actually spend the time. We kind of rely on our teams updating us on what they're doing. And there's this perception gap between what they think they do and what they actually do. We've all experienced that. So action and observation is really important, because that gives us the visibility and the opportunity then to coach for change, to be able to coach them, help them to see the things they can't see for themselves, and to start to build a plan for improvement, which takes us through to kind of professional development. And how do we help them to see a bigger picture for themselves we call that stage the heroes, heroes in the making. How do we help them to become, much better, world class at what they're doing? So that's our kind of 5 steps, and that's been really useful as a model for helping leaders to become better coaches. But we think about kind of where are we trying to get our teams to get to? We really want them to think about the future. We want them to kind of start to make a plan for the future that gives them, perhaps a little more insight around what's possible. And the thing about goal setting is, if we have a goal that's good enough, we think it's going to be like this. For most of us anyway, certainly for me, I thought it was going to be, I've got this idea for myself in the organization, or setting up my own business. I'm going to get clients, it's just going to fly. And it never works out like that. It never worked out like that when I moved into sales leadership. It never worked out like that when I moved into general business management. You work hard, you're insecure a bit, you fail a lot, life gets in the way, you get lots of help that you don't necessarily want or need. Sometimes you seek it, sometimes you don't. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself, you look back on 5 or 10 years and everyone's like, God, how did you manage that? It was amazing. Seemed like an overnight success. And actually, your journey is the squiggly line of, kind of success and failure. But without that end point in mind, wanting to be world class or wanting to get to wherever it is you want to get to, you'll find that any setback for a lot of people becomes a major distraction and a risk to future success. So helping our teams and ourselves kind of go, right, actually, this is the line in the sand, this is where we want to get to, can be really useful as a principle around goal setting. And I don't know if any of you have heard of this system we have in our brain called the RAS, the reticular activating system. When I first learned about this, I was intrigued. But the reticular activating system is a filtering system in the mind. So you'll all have experienced times when you might want to get a new piece of kit or a new car or a new something. And as soon as you decide that that's something that you want to get, you notice what happens. You start to see it everywhere, right? Particularly happens with like cars, maybe handbags, maybe, new phone, maybe a tablet, whatever it is, right? You just start to notice they pop up everywhere. And that is your brain's reticular activating system starting to filter out all the other distractions. So that's what we want. So that's what we're going to notice. And it's the same with goal setting. So once our teams and we start to set goals, the brain goes, right, okay, now that's where we're headed, and starts to look for the things that can help us achieve those goals. And this is why goal setting is so important. It's not just about setting a goal for the future. It's about priming our minds to start to look for opportunities to achieve them. And that's why professional development is so important for our teams, because that's what increases performance. But without this initial idea around what they want to change, they don't ever activate their reticular activating system. So I also want to talk just a bit about this phenomenon called, and you may have heard of this, right? So it's called the Pygmalion effect. Anybody heard of the Pygmalion effect? Few of you nodding. Yeah, good. Brilliant. Thank you. And just want to remind you of this because it's so important, right? The Pygmalion effect is in essence, it's the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So what happens is, what we believe about somebody, I'm going to start on the left here, what we believe about somebody or ourselves changes our actions towards them. So if we think someone's a high performer, we treat them differently from if we think someone's struggling, right? So our actions change towards them. And the way we act towards them then changes the belief that they have about us and themselves. And from that position, that changes the way that they act. And then that kind of the way they act then changes how we believe they can act and are capable of acting. And all of a sudden, we end up in this constant loop where we actually become the catalyst for somebody's performance purely by the way we treat them. And it's interesting because I've experienced this multiple times in my career where by sitting down, having a development conversation with somebody, and I've experienced it in 2 ways. I've experienced it with people having conversations with me saying, I believe you're capable of more. And if you put your mind to it, you could achieve X, Y, and Z if it's what you want. And I've also had those conversations with members of my team where I'm saying, I'm seeing this, but I don't believe it's you. Actually, I've also seen you perform at this level. I've seen you be able to really switch on and tune into opportunity. And it's really interesting. Those conversations can sometimes be transformation conversations for our teams, where just our belief in them and the conversation about our belief in them changes the way they act. And that when they act differently, they change their belief about themselves, which of course changes the way they then continue to act, and that changes our opinion of them and the way that we act towards them. So we end up in this really useful cycle. Now, the challenge is sometimes the cycle goes the other way and we're not even aware we're doing it. So this is also about thinking for ourselves a little more intentionally about some of those conversations that we have with key people in our teams to get them to raise their sights and expectations around themselves. And I talk about kind of in terms of leaders, what we can do that's practical, that actually makes a difference. And we talked about, we'll talk a little about professional development, but one thing is, monthly reviews. I once worked for a manager who used to just cancel our monthly reviews at the last minute. So it'd be an hour before the review. I'd done all my prep, I was ready, and he'd just go, "Oh, sorry, I can't make it now." And the message that I received was, okay, these aren't important, right? Because it used to happen quite often. One, I thought they weren't important. Actually, when I finally challenged him on it, he said, "Well, you've got everything under control. I don't need to be having reviews with you." So, which was really interesting. So his view was I had it under control. My view was it's not important. So that's really, really fascinating. I would say where you can maintain the level of reviews so that you can kind of keep that frequency and keep that engagement of your teams. Treat them as important as any other business meeting. And then I think, we talked about this coaching model and contracting. I think it's really important to just strategically agree what you're working on with your teams every time you revisit your monthly reviews. So you kind of set their sights kind of on the important stuff, on the priorities every time. It's like a reset opportunity. And when you're contracting and agreeing every time, that's really useful. I also think having an agenda, so there's a number of things you're going to cover on a regular basis, so you get that frequency and rhythm of performance in place, can be really useful. And then once a quarter, I believe going deeper into personal and professional development and how are they progressing and what are they doing to make that shift in their own professional development and performance. And that's really useful to make that part of the rhythm. And then really we want to be challenging each of our teams, thinking about this Pygmalion effect, challenging them to unlock their highest potential, recognizing that everybody's got slightly different potential, but for them, what is the level that they want to get to, and how do we as their leaders challenge them to unlock what they're really capable of, because sometimes that takes somebody else for them to see it. And then, of course, holding them accountable to make those shifts and changes in the way that they think about themselves and develop themselves. And then finally, for us as leaders to think in those sessions, to be open to feedback from our teams, to act on that feedback and think about our position as a positive role model. Because one of the things that I learned, probably I've been in leadership a little while, and I realized it, was that our teams tend to spend a lot of time kind of watching what we do and watching how we operate, watching how we appear under pressure, watching how we handle difficult conversations, watching how we handle situations that arise, how do we handle our peers. And they learn and adapt and almost replicate some of the things we do. So they don't necessarily do what we say, they do what we do. And that's really, really useful. Remembering that we're a role model for them can be really a good reminder for us to kind of stay on track ourselves. And then there's a self-coaching model that I learned a while back. This is really useful. I'll share this with you, and then I'm going to invite you to kind of have a conversation in your groups about what you might need to implement. But there's these 3 questions that are really useful in terms of coaching questions. And the first one is, what went well? So in any situation or even in a review, what's gone well over the last month? What's gone really well? And allow your team to or your team member to talk about that. Second question then is, okay, so what have you learned in the last month? What have been the key lessons that you've kind of taken away from the last month in role? And let them talk about that. And then those 2 steps open people's perspective for the third question, which is, okay, so what do you need to commit to change going forward? And there's 3 really simple kind of coaching questions around developing and improving. They're really powerful because you're getting the person to kind of get the positive association with what they're doing well in their role, getting them to become open to learning and thinking about, what shifts they might need to make, what's perhaps not going the way that they thought it would, and then of course making changes so that they can start to address those things in advance as they go forward. And I've found that these as a question good for self-coaching and good for kind of team coaching around performance and development. So I share those with you because they've been useful for me. Okay, we're at 10 to the hour. I've talked for a bit. Hopefully you've got some useful insights from that. So I'm going to pause my screen share. Hold on a second, let me find the way to do that. We've had a few other people join us, so welcome to the session this morning. I'm going to invite you to talk to each other about your experiences. Let me just stop sharing. So I'm going to invite you to join a couple of breakout rooms where talk about your experiences of development, and based on what we talked about this morning, what you're doing now and what you might need to enhance and improve going forward. And let me just open up the breakout rooms. You might need to, we've had a couple of people join us a little bit late, so you might just need to refresh on a couple of the topics. Let me have a look. Yeah, it's good. Okay, so we've got a couple of rooms of 4 and a 3. And I know Pauline said she's got to jump off shortly. So Pauline, you're in a 4, so that room might drop to a 3. But yeah, just talk about your experience of kind of managing professional development for yourself and your teams. Some of the principles that we've talked about this morning might have made you think, actually, there's a couple of things I need to change. So just talk about those changes you might need to make. And then we'll regroup. I'm going to join one of the rooms. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes on this. I'm only going to give you 10 minutes. It's never quite enough. So I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to have this discussion. And if you could also just kind of get someone in the group just to agree to share some ideas when you come back, if that's all right. Does that sound okay to everybody? Brilliant. It gives you a chance to meet your peers as well today. So excellent. Right. I'll open the rooms and I look forward to seeing you back here in 15. See you shortly. So let's just, if you're okay, I'll resume the recording. I'd love to hear what you discussed through your sessions. We'll kind of go through room by room. So room 1 was James, Nivert, and Steve. Who'd like to share your feedback?
So I took some notes. Yeah. So I took some notes. It was a really good discussion. First off, we talked about how it's great to get ideas. The challenge is putting it into action. That's always the challenge and the difficult bit. We kind of shared that development tends to happen when there's a performance issue or a problem. Quite often, we get a bit stuck there, and how that's a challenge for us. We need to make sure that we don't only develop when there's a problem, and I think that'll probably resonate with a few people. We then had a bit of a discussion on, Nivert mentioned about a welfare exchange they have that I thought was really interesting, where they have a 10-minute catch up. How are you? How's everything in the team? You see anything? You're happy with and this kind of check on the welfare of people. And I thought, that was a good discussion around how we all manage that in different ways. And that was really interesting. Aligning to the goals of the individual was something that we talked about at the last bit, and making sure that people understand how their individual goals impact not just them, but then the wider goals of the organization. So that was quite good. And then the use of templates came up, as I just wrote templates myself, and I didn't mention that, came up a few times. That sometimes having these templates for these discussions is really, really helpful. It means you ask the key questions and you record it, and it means that you can push towards where you want to go. So that's 2-minute summary of what was a very good discussion. Nice.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Appreciate you taking the notes and giving the feedback. James Nivert, is anything that you'd like to add to Stephen's summary? Thank you, Stephen.
The only thing that I thought Steve mentioned that we spoke about is these trackers, that when we have these meetings with people, he does something quite cool where he sends his colleagues like an anonymous poll to see how they're feeling. They give it back to him, but anonymously, and he kind of sees where they're at in terms of how they're feeling at that time. So he's like, when there's a team event, obviously everyone's on a high, so the poll's much better. Maybe when there's like, a deadline and everyone's stressed out, then, you know, feelings are a lot lower. And I just thought that was quite interesting. We don't do that, but I think that would be a nice way for people to get a gauge of what's going on in your team.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Gives you that kind of almost benchmark of how people are feeling about the situation, doesn't it? Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, thank you for calling Stephen out on that one, Nivet. That's good. Thank you. James, how about you? Anything to add?
I don't think so. I think it was all covered. I mean, it was a really good discussion. I guess, yeah, the highlights, again, Steve said, trying to get out of the habit of only affecting change when there's an issue, but also trying to get ahead of pulse checking. So I use a 360-degree survey thing on a monthly basis. I tend to use that just for myself to try and get feedback. But again, I'm going to adopt the pulse check on, you know, how people are feeling around their involvement in the business and the team. So.
Yeah, it's really good, that, isn't it? Because it's a proactive measure. You can start to address things before they become, you know, bigger problems for people or bigger issues in the business. Yes, really like that. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Nivet. Very good. I like Nivet's kind of well-being conversation as well. You know, just check how are you first. And I'm sure you've all seen this before. You know, that whole ask the question twice, because the first time you ask the question, most people are just programmed on default to go, yeah, I'm fine, thanks. And then to ask it again, no, you know, really, how are you? It's really that always, anytime I do that, it always opens up. People kind of will say, well, actually, there's a couple of things that have been playing on my mind, or there's a couple of things that aren't quite where I need them to be. And that's really useful because it allows you to coach them and start to address them proactively. Yeah, really good. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. That's great. Room 2 or group 2 was Ash, Dorcas and Nadine. Did you guys talk about who would feedback?
We did, and I think Pauline was taking the notes, but I did take a few pointers as well.
Yeah, because Pauline's had to rush off to her AI conference.
She has, and I think all 4 who were within that within our group are from different backgrounds, and Pauline kind of alluded to something similar to what you had mentioned earlier on. When we started this session about the vision, looking at it and working towards it. And she's kind of within the sort of IT arena and wants to progress, looking at her next kind of contract role, etc. And that's what she's zoned in on, and that's what she's aiming towards, of being successful within sort of the IT and tech kind of sales. And I think this was one of the reasons why she's actually going to this particular session. I think from my point of view, I looked at it as I do my own personal development because I work on various contracts for different companies coming from a pharmaceutical background as well as stroke IT. So the feedback I kind of gave was I look out for mentors. You know, I've been connected with yourself for best part of 18 months now and follow what you do, and have joined these particular sessions to learn from, you know, others within this group. And the point what James brought up earlier about the 360 survey, great kind of feedback to, you know, look within yourself and see what others are saying about yourself. So personal development for me is kind of, I have to do it myself in a way. Look at mentors. I think Dorcas mentioned within our group around looking at high performance and role. Dorcas, you never mentioned what role you actually do, so I didn't quite catch that. If you want to just allude to that. You're on mute, Dorcas. And then Ash works as a principal of a practice. Was that correct, Ash? You're on mute as well.
You've lost your team, Nadine. You've lost.
Correct. Sorry, I was talking and then I realised. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
hi, Ash. Hi, Ash.
Hi, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And then Ash also mentioned about seeing the vision and where she would like to go as well, and has been on several kind of courses of looking at one-to-one meetings, kind of looking at how the team is feeling and just getting in the engagement.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks, Nadine. That's great. And you know, the thing is, right, in a lot of our businesses, and I've found this multiple times throughout my career, it's really easy to just focus on the functional stuff in the business. You know, if you are a business that focuses on IT, you know, to make sure that everyone understands the platform. You know, Ash is a principle of a practice, make sure that everyone clinically is up to speed. We have lots of different functions within our business, but actually to make sure that people's kind of professional development around their communication skills, their ability to think differently about how they grow. If you're in leadership, to think about how you lead your teams effectively, hold people accountable. And that's kind of tends to be outside the sphere of the function of the business. And that's really important to develop those skills as well. Because if we don't, we leave ourselves with a gap that can affect the performance of the entire team. So really important that we kind of keep that on our own agendas. Really good. Thanks, Nadine. Thank you, Ash and Dorcas as well. And then our final group was Paul, Andrew, and Fatbala, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Is that you, Andrew? Are you speaking up?
Yeah, you know me, never miss an opportunity to talk to people.
Well done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we so how to say, the first thing we came to conclusion was there's an awful lot of similarities between the News Corp part of the world where Paul lives and in the life science environment where I am.
Mm-hmm.
So there was startling parallels, which was actually really, really interesting. The predominance of our conversation was around a problem that I'm challenged with at the moment and have been challenged with for years, and we've spoken about before. And it's just, how do you get people to change when they really, really don't want to? And I've struggled with this for years. And you know, when we're talking about, you know, performance enhancement and review in the process of actually building somebody, change in somebody, the industry I work in just does not give you time to enable that. There's no, you know, oh, you know, we'll come back to it in a month's time. It's literally, if you haven't sorted your problem today, then it's a much bigger problem tomorrow. So it's just understanding how things work in the different industries. And then we came into, when you get people that are long-term in a company and have always done it one way, and then the company's quite siloed, which was the point Paul made, it becomes an even bigger problem trying to implement any sort of personal change. And it's what strategies have we used to enable that? And I honestly haven't got very many good ones, because the worst case offenders I've had in my career, well, they weren't in the company for very long.
Okay, so that was how you dealt with it, right?
Yeah, it was. They were, you know, they were encouraged by the company to leave very quickly.
Yeah,
which isn't the right way of solving stuff, but sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah, well, you need the right people in the right seats in the organisation with the right attitude and motivation, right? And
was that everything, Paul?
Yeah, that was everything. It was it's an interesting conversation because I've just left. So not only, I mean, I worked for News Corp, but before I left Australia, I am now just finished with Snowflake, and the similarities, and I don't know if everybody knows of Snowflake or has heard of them, but they're a data cloud provider. The similarities between the challenges in those two different verticals were extremely similar. So, you know, we've always done it this way. We've always approached this way. Why do we need to change? Don't change what's not broken, et cetera, et cetera. And it's always going to be that challenge because it's human nature. We don't instinctively want change unless we can really feel that it's to our benefit and that we're going to be able to leverage and move forward with it and really embrace it ourselves. Then that change will come a lot easier and a lot smoother.
Yeah, very good. And that, you're right. You know, years ago, I'm sure you've heard this, you know, I had a manager who said to me when I first started my leadership role, he said, you know, what you'll find, Justin, is that actually managing the business and the functions is quite straightforward. What will always challenge you are the people. And he was absolutely right. It's because sometimes we just can't quite understand why people either do what they do or don't do what they should be doing. And it just kind of, we get this cognitive dissonance because by virtue of the fact that we're all here as leaders, we've been high performers, we're then, you know, evolved into leadership positions. So you kind of almost don't even understand how someone can even think that way. And that cognitive dissonance is really difficult to deal with early on. We have to kind of actually start to go, right, let's take a couple of steps back let's look at the fundamentals and get the fundamentals in place, and then we can move people forward. And I remember that's happened to me a number of times in my leadership career, where I'm like, you almost, like the computer says, no, you can't even understand why someone thinks or acts the way they do. And that's a big part of our role as leaders, to help people kind of take those steps back, recognize good practice, start to build that in, and then from there you can improve performance. Glad that you're all having the same experiences. It wasn't just me. Very good. Thank you for the feedback. I really like that. So let me just share a couple of other things with you before we close our session today, because there's a couple of things that I think could be useful for you. Hold on a sec. Let me just find here we go, find my slides. So when I was first kind of in a leadership position, I was working with a mentor, and we were talking about my career development, and she asked me a really good question. She said, what's in your development plan, Justin? And this was probably like late 90s, early 2000s. And to be honest with you, at that point, I got to a position in my career more by luck than good judgment. And I hadn't done any real planning. And so my response to her was kind of, I don't really have one. So she and I went through a process where we developed a couple of plans. I'll just share those with you, because these aren't those plans, but they're similar versions that have kind of evolved over time. The first was what we called a strategic career development plan. So start to think about what I wanted to achieve long term, what are the skills I wanted to develop, what was the development kind of opportunities and programs I wanted to go on, what things were I use. And we developed this plan I still use today. And on the right-hand side is like an example, on the left-hand side is a blank. But you can see it kind of starts you thinking about not just your current role, but what's important to you personally, in your career, personally, with family, friends, that kind of thing. What's important in your life, what skills you've got to now, and what skills you want to develop, your experience, the current job skill needs. And then starting to think about your career interests. What do I want to do for the next job? What do I want to do midterm and long term? And, for some people, this might be just about getting better at their role, and that's absolutely fine. We need people that are high performers in their role and are happy to stay there. Then start to think about development planning. And I don't know if you've heard of this 70-20-10 principle, but that's quite well established. So what it shows is that 10% of what you'll do will be a program or a course that you go on. 70% will be what you learn through the work you do. So just using the job to improve your performance. And then 20% will be through what you do yourself and with people that you work alongside. So your networks, the alliances that you have, partners, maybe a mentor, maybe a coach. So then you end up with this kind of 70-20-10 view on your development. So you think about the whole of what you're doing as the vehicle for your professional development. It'd be really useful just to get people to tune into that as they think about their kind of next 12 months or so. And then to map out, what don't I like doing? Because that can be useful, because you can start to build in, collaborative working with other people that kind of prop up your dislikes, and vice versa for you and them. And then think about your unique selling points. What's unique about what you're doing? And this becomes your kind of elevator as you start to talk about, what you're trying to achieve and where you're headed in the future. And then some really simple kind of action steps and status around things you want to do. And that as a plan on a page, but also thinking strategically, personally, and professionally can be really useful. So, because Stephen, I think your group talked about templates. That's a nice template. Happy to share this with you. I'll send this to you after today's session. And then the second template that she and I worked on was a more kind of practical development action plan template. So we had my strategic career plan, and then on a kind of quarterly or 6-monthly basis, I just used to document a development action plan. So that I'd normally pick 3 things I wanted to work on. And I'd say, right, what are those 3 areas I want to work on? What's the desired outcome? What do I want to be able to do in that area? What's the time scale that I'm going to work on it? And then what are the key actions that I'm going to take that link to that kind of goal and desired outcome? And as a simple plan, 3 things, 3 actions per kind of area. It's a really useful way to just document your development. So I'll happily share both of those with you as a follow-up from today's session. Hopefully they'll be useful for you as you think about developing them in your business. And then I love this quote from Bill Gates. And if it's good enough for Bill Gates, I have to say it's good enough for me. We all need people who will give us feedback, because that's how we improve. And that probably has been the biggest, for me, the biggest kind of change as I've gone through my career, is having people who are prepared to give me the feedback and the visibility of things I can't see for myself. That's really important. And making that part of our process with our teams, with coaching, with leadership, with our business processes. And I think I said it at the start. So we try and shift from this culture of having to give feedback to people asking for it, and us being open to it. It can be really useful if we get that culture in place. So I'll ask you just to think about, for yourselves, you've got some key actions, you had some good discussions. What are your key actions from today's session? And there's a couple other things I'll share with you. One is, I don't know if anybody's used this Coaching Leaders Scorecard. We use this scorecard as a really nice way to benchmark where you are in terms of your leadership approach, and in particular thinking about how you coach people. I'll just drop that in the chat in case anybody's interested. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to run through it, but it's a really nice diagnostic tool. It kind of gives you just a bit of self-awareness around where you might want to focus in future, particularly when it comes to leadership development and coaching. So I'll just drop that in the chat for you. I'll also share those development documents with you. They're part of a bigger toolkit that we use called the Coaching Leaders Toolkit, which has lots of documents in it. We use this to kind of run our leadership development programs. So it's got a full kind of workbook. If anybody's interested in the full toolkit, again, I'm happy to share that with you, because it might be useful in terms of how you can use that within your businesses. And then one other thing I found that kind of use this principle myself as I was thinking about, when I set my own business up, and I was recognizing what are the things we need to be successful as business leaders. There's a number of things I've experienced that have been really useful. The first is having either a forum or somebody that I can have a confidential conversation with. So to be able to share things that are difficult, and I need a safe space to talk about them, that can be really useful, whether that's a group or individual. Having a community of people that are going through the same things that I'm going through, I found really useful throughout my career. Anytime when I've not been part of that kind of community, I've noticed the disconnect in kind of how I feel about my performance. And these Friday morning, we've been doing this for a while now, and a few of you have come a few times, so I appreciate that, because this is part of the community I hope we can build as well. Collaboration, so being able to share ideas. That's why it's important to do the breakout groups, so that you can kind of start to collaborate and understand what other people are going through. And then the final two are really interesting, but probably go beyond what we're doing in these sessions, but challenging someone to challenge your ideas and challenge your perspectives so that you think differently, because we really have to keep evolving the way that we think. And of course, making a commitment to ourselves to do the things that we want to do. And that's the big thing, right? How do we make a change? How do we make that change stick? We do it through commitment, and sometimes we need someone else to hold us accountable to that commitment. So I'm conscious of time, but I'd love to offer you, if anybody is interested after today's session, if you'd like to talk about either your professional development, this professional development, how you build your own sense of kind of community and commitment, if you'd like a complimentary one-to-one coaching session with me, I'd love to offer you that. Let me just drop this in the chat as well. This is an opportunity just to get some of that, I guess, get some of that direct experience, one of coaching, but also if there's something that's on your mind in your business right now and you'd like to talk to someone completely kind of external and objective, then that's kind of, I guess that's kind of what I do mostly in my business, actually, is to have those objective conversations. So if you'd like a free coaching session, 45 minutes, please let me know. What we cover really is where are you now? What's the current challenge or opportunity? Where would you like to be? Might be 6 months, 12 months out, and what do you need to do to make that happen? And as simple as that sounds, having someone else ask you those questions can be really useful. That's the whole point of coaching. So that is the end of our session. We're 2 minutes to past. So thanks everyone for staying until the end. It's been great to see you all. I am happy to just hang on for a couple of extra minutes if anybody's got any additional questions or there's anything else you would like to cover. Happy to do that, but otherwise we'll close the session and I'll say thanks so much for your support. Really, really enjoyed having you all here for this session today. Thank you, and thanks for your engagement. Really, really good session.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks,
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
weekend. Take care.
Thanks,
You
Justin.
too.
Pleasure. Good to see you, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Cheers.
really good to see you. I really liked your bit on the question. I haven't been prioritizing my professional development. Something really always gets in the way. That such an obvious thing. I'm going to nick that. I've written it down and stolen it. So thanks.
Good man. Good man. No, please do. Yeah, it's that's the whole idea of these sessions, is to give us all ideas around what we can do to improve. And thank you for sharing yours as well. They were really useful.
Cool.
Thank you so
Have a good
much, Justin.
weekend.
Bye. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Nivert. Take care.
Bye.
See you.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Thanks a lot, Steve. Good to see you. Take care. See you at another one, hopefully.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Steve. Take care. See you. Bye.